What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over blocking part 2 within our Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series. Now in the previous episode of the blocking mechanic, we had gone over actually putting the character into the block state when pressing a button, taking them out of the block state when releasing the button, and setting up animations related to that. So I can press the block button and I go into the block state. The character labeled Shawnthebro on the bottom left there. If I press my block button, I go into the block state. Now, all these other characters can also do it. And you can see I can press all of them at the same time. They're on the block animation. And they remain there until the button is released. In this episode, we're going to have a block shield. Now, we don't have visuals for it yet. But we're going to set up all the behavior for what a block shield would do. Specifically, we're going to set up block shield durability. And what that means is our shield or our blocking state can be hit a certain number of times until that shield breaks, and then we enter the stun state. And in the stun state, we can't do anything. After a certain amount of time passes within the stun state, we will then return to idle. So I'm going to go down to my characters in the outliner here, and I'm going to pick one of them. I'm going to pick my first character here, because that is the character that is easiest for me to block with, and that is the character that is labeled Shawnthebro. So in the bottom left here, that is who we are picking. Now, the yellow character named Default next to them is the attacker. So I'm going to use an attack, and Shawnthebro is going to block it. Shawnthebro stayed in the blocking state. If I hit him again, still stays in the blocking state. If I hit him a third time, the block will be broken and Shawnthebro will be stunned. He can't move even when I'm pressing his keys. After 5 seconds, or what I've labeled as 300 frames, the character will be able to move and function properly again. And we can actually demonstrate this even without having an actual block shield visual. I can go to my character and I can look for block. I have some new variables here that we'll get into adding when the episode actually starts. But I have block shield durability, max block shield durability, and block shield break stun frames. And so the max block shield durability is how many hits I can have total. The current block shield durability is how many hits I have left. So if I'm blocking and I get attacked, you're going to see the block shield durability in the bottom right hand corner of this video goes down to 2, then it goes down to 1. Then if I get hit again, it goes down to 0. And the character receives 300 frames of stun. So now if I check something else, character state, you can see the character state is stunned. And after those 300 frames, they will automatically return to idle, and then they can act. This is just one of the ways that you can exit out of the stun state. You can also exit out of the stun state by mashing faster in some cases, or just by taking damage. That might knock you out of it. But for now, we're just going to be going through that flow of having durability on our shield or on our block, it breaking, and us going to the stun state. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started, but before we do, I'd love to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for everything you do. I'm so incredibly grateful for all the support you've given. It is so incredibly fun to work on, and I'm glad you guys are enjoying it as well. If you want to get caught up in the series, this is episode 47 of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series. So you can click this iCard in the top right corner, and it will link you to all the episodes, the entire playlist that we've done to this point, so that you can get caught up on the series. Alternatively, if you don't care about that, I do recommend watching the previous episode, which is where we initially set up the blocking state, as well as the animation that goes with it. And that is this iCard in the top right corner right here. We are going to go to the code today, because this is a code and blueprint project, and we are going to go to our SSB template character.h. This is our base character. And in our E character state enum that we had, I'm adding a new enum value now, and that is the E_stunned. I put it under the blocking, but the order doesn't matter. Just add a new enum value so that we can set the character state to this value. And when the character is stunned, they won't be able to do much of anything. Now, if we scroll down to our variables, I want to have some new variables for our shield and for our stun. So some of the ones that I was showing you in the live demo are the max block shield durability, and block shield break stun frames. Additionally, I also have stun frames, which is the current number of stun frames. So we're going to add all of these variables today. I've made them all U properties so that we can access them in the blueprint if we want to. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. And I've given them a category of block and stun, respectively. Max block shield durability is the maximum number of hits that a block can take before the shield breaks. Now this is the maximum, so it's just the highest value. And I'm going to put this as a default of 3, but you can play around with it as much as you want to get the value right in your game. Then we have block shield durability, and this is the current durability of the shield. So even if the shield can take 3 hits total, if we've already taken 2, we only have 1 hit left. So block shield durability is the current number of hits that the block shield can take before it breaks. Now, block shield break stun frames is the number of stun frames given to a character when their block shield is broken. This could be different for every character, or you could have it global across the board so that all the characters receive the same number of stun frames once their block shield is broken. Then I have stun frames, which this is the current number of stun frames, because even if the stun frames we have is 300 to start with, it's going to decrement over time until it reaches 0, or until it's canceled for any reason. And so we still need to capture the actual number of stun frames remaining. Now, additionally, within this logic, I'm going to scroll down and I want to override a new function. And we're going to override our tick function. You may have seen this before, but the tick function is a function that is called every single frame, and it's essentially your update function. Now, the tick function specifically comes from the A character class, which is the parent class of our class. So when we use the template, we get this character created that inherits a character. Due to it inheriting a character, we can override the functions that we have in that class if we want to do specific logic in our tick function. So it might differ from what the parent class does in their tick function. In this case, we're going to need to use it. To do this, we can write our function like this: virtual, which just means that we're going to be overriding it. Then we have our actual function definition, so void tick float delta time. It has to be written like this because when you override a function, it has to match the function name and the parameters. So void tick float delta time override. So virtual and override, like I said, they're just related to the actual overriding the function and getting it in this class. This is the actual function that we're going to be filling out, and that's our void tick delta time. Now that we have those 4 variables and that function, we can go into the CPP of our character. And we're going to want to scroll down to where we set our variables and their defaults. I have my 3 blocking variables here, and I have my stunned variable here. So I set my max block shield durability to 3. Again, you could change this per character, or you could make it a global. I'm just going to default to 3 for each character for now. Then I set my actual current block shield durability to max block shield durability. The block shield durability will match it, so if we change max block shield durability to 5, the character will start with a durability of 5 on their shield. Then we have the number of stun frames once the shield is broken. Now, I set it to an arbitrary 300. Assuming your game runs at 60 frames per second, that means 300 frames is going to be 5 seconds worth of time. This could be too short, this could be too much. But remember, this is not seconds, it's frames now. This is going to be more important later. Seconds are fine to use, timers are fine to use, but specifically with damage and stun, frames are really useful over times. And you'll see that as we get into more stuff, why we want to use frames over seconds. Then I also default the current number of stun frames to be 0 because the character does not start stunned when they're in their entrance animation or when they're spawning, whatever the case may be, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, we want to go to our take damage function and change a bit of the logic. So let's scroll down. Here's my take damage function. We only want to do all this take damage logic where we're adding to our damage counter and launching the opponent if the character was not blocking. If they're blocking, it's entirely different. So above the first line in take damage, I've added a new if statement now. If character state is not equal to E character state blocking. So if they're not blocking, they're going to do all the same logic that we've already set up in take damage. I've changed none of it. However, if they are blocking, we need to go into the else. So you can follow my bracket down. That is all the if. This else means that they are blocking. If they're blocking when they took damage, meaning they were hit by a strike hitbox, we don't want to actually add to the damage counter. We just want to decrease from the block shield durability. They're going to negate all damage. Additionally, you could have some chip damage that does damage them, but they receive less damage. We'll get into that sort of thing later in the series, but for now, we're going to negate all damage. So we want to decrement block shield durability, meaning we just want to subtract 1 from it. We want to remove 1 from it. So if it was 3 and they were hit by an attack, it now goes to 2. If it's 2 and they were hit by an attack, it now goes to 1. And lastly, if it's 1 and it gets hit by an attack, it goes to 0. In the case of it being less than or equal to 0, that means we have reached our minimum value. Our block shield is broken. We no longer have a block shield, in which case we need to do different logic. So we actually need to make a new function that I've called break block shield. So let's go back into that header file for a second. Scroll down to our functions. And here is my break block shield function. So I did make it blueprint callable again, but this is also not necessary. You can leave it as just a code function for now if you want. But the important part is that you have void break block shield here. And this is the logic that's going to occur when our shield is broken. So back in the CPP now, again, if our durability has gone to 0 or less than that due to multiple hitboxes colliding at the same time, whatever the case may be, we want to say our block shield has been broken. In this case, we want to go ahead and call that function. Now this is all that we have to do and take damage, but just be aware the return damage counter still has to be outside of the if and else. Okay, everything that was already in the function of take damage is inside the if statement now that checks to see if the character state is not blocking, except for the very last line, which is return damage counter. This is because the take damage function returns an integer, so it must do that. If you section it off and only put it in an if statement, then it won't let you compile. You're not able to not return a value to a function that requires a value. So I recommend just leaving return damage out of it instead of trying to return it through the if and the else. It's just extra work. So just leave this line as the very last line in the function outside the if and outside the else. At this point, we can go to the break block shield function. So just scroll down to wherever you want to add it. I added my 2 functions for this episode at the very bottom. So here's my break block shield. So go ahead and add this, and specifically I'm adding void a SSB template character, : break block shield. Right now it's very simple because we don't have any visuals for the shield. So all I do is I set my character state to be the stunned state. Then I take the stun frames and set it equal to the block shield break stun frames, because this is where we are getting our number of stun frames from. We know that our shield was broken, and that's why the character is stunned. Once our shield is broken, our character will now be stunned for the number of frames you set up in the constructor. The last thing we need to do in here is set up the tick function. So this is the function that we were overriding. So notice we don't have virtual or override here. You don't need them in the CPP. Putting them in the header file is fine. So now we just set this up like a standard function. Void a SSB template character, : tick, then our parameters, which are float, delta, time. Immediately, I call the super tick function and pass in delta time, which means that we're going to call the parent's tick function. We still want to do all the logic that is in the parent's tick function, the a character tick function. We're not overriding this function for the sake of removing logic that is within the parent's tick function. Instead, we're trying to add to it. So super : tick, passing in the delta time parameter, will call the parent's tick function. Then we can go and additionally add the rest of the logic that we want to do on top of that. Now, we're just going to check to see if our stun frames are greater than 0. Even if we're not in the stunned character state, our stun frames could be greater than 0. And so if they are, for any reason, we want to just decrement from them every frame. This is just going to subtract 1. Remember, tick is called every single frame. So we have 300 frames in 5 seconds. This is going to get called 300 times within 5 seconds. Every time it's going to decrease the stun frames by 1. Once it finally gets down to 0 or less than that, for any reason, if this gets skipped, always good to check less than or equal to 0. That means we're ready to return back to idle. We're done with our stun. In this case, we should set our block shield durability back to the max block shield durability. Notice we never edited the max block shield durability. This is a variable that's basically a constant. Right now we're not treating it like that, but it's essentially a constant value. We're not changing it anywhere. So in which case we can set our current durability for the block shield back to the maximum, and then we can reset our character state back to idle. This means that everything is now back in the original state, the stun is done, the block is repaired, and we are good to go. We can continue with our game. A few things we should do with the stun here are make sure that we can't do certain actions while we're stunned. So I'm going to scroll up to the top of the file, and I'm just going to start going down. Every time we get to a function where we should not be able to do it while we're stunned, I'm going to point it out. So starting here at move right, we shouldn't be able to move if our character is stunned. Now we already had an if check at the very top of this function. If can move and if character state not equal to blocking, we're going to just add another and make sure that the character state is not equal to stunned. We're just doing this because if the character is stunned, they shouldn't be able to move right. Now scrolling down to move right controller, which is only different for if we're using actual gamepads and not the keyboard. We still had an if statement in here to make sure the character could move and the state wasn't equal to blocking. Same thing applies here. We want to make sure our character state is not equal to stunned as well. Now start jump is the same way. We don't want to be able to jump if we're a stunned character. We were already checking if the character state was not equal to blocking and if the character state was not equal to dead. I've also added in here character state not equal to stunned. Additionally, you probably should add if can move, just like in move right. Because we probably don't want to be able to enable a jump if we can't move for any reason. So even if we're not stunned, if we're stuck due to not being able to move, we should add can move in there. So just adding that in there now. Now stop jump is a little strange because if I've started the jump, then I don't have to worry about stop jump. It'll work fine. Or if I haven't started the jump, I don't have to worry about stop jump because it won't fire. But that's not actually true. Stop jump just fires whenever you release the jump button. In which case, we should still account for it because actually it can affect things if we don't do this correctly. So I'm going to add if character state not equal to e character state stunned. And I'm also going to add can move in here as well. We may have to adjust it later in the future depending on how our jump logic works, but honestly, they should be matching right now because if a press doesn't fire but the release can fire, it can mess up some of our logic with our jump or with our behavior in the future. So just make them match even though they weren't before. Now, start crouch, we didn't have anything for. We had no if statement for. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy the if statement from start and stop jump. And I'm going to paste it in here. And I am going to just encompass the entire function. We don't want to set the character to be crouching if they can't move or if they're stunned or if they're dead. I am actually going to take out the blocking condition here because you may want to be able to go from blocking to crouch blocking if you have that in your game. So, you know, potentially take out the blocking or leave it in. It's okay either way. I'm going to take it out in case we do decide to have blocking and crouch blocking be different. So that way we can go from blocking to crouch blocking or crouch blocking back to blocking. So now this is what my if statement looks like. If we can move and we're not stunned and we're not dead. You could also add respawning in here if you want. If this if statement doesn't return true, we don't want to be able to set the character to crouching and we don't want them to be able to fall through one-way platforms. So entire function encompassed and we're good to go. Now stop crouching, really it should be the same thing like I said for stop jumping. Even though we didn't have it in here before, I do recommend that we have these if statements and these conditions in here covering the entire function. Because otherwise, when we release the crouch button, we can set this to be false, but say we were stunned and we didn't want to stop crouching when we're stunned, that would be allowed. So we should check and make sure that these conditions are being met before we do any logic and stop crouch as well. Now, basic attack, also same thing. We can use the basic attack even if we're not in any of these states. So I'm going to go to basic attack and I'm going to encompass the entire function yet again in that if statement. If can move and character state is not equal to stunned and character state is not equal to dead. Everything else in the function can remain the same, and it will function exactly the same as we're used to. Just we can only call it if these things are true. Now, basic smash attack. The basic smash attack gets called if the character is holding the button and they release it. So technically, you don't have to worry about encompassing this one because we can't get to that state unless we go through basic attack. For now, we can leave this alone. We may have to edit it in the future because there may be certain conditions where we can technically use or trigger a smash attack and we get canceled. In this case, we don't want to actually go and do this logic. But for now, it's safe to leave alone. The special attack is basically just my second attack. So I'm going to encompass it within this if statement, the same as I did basic attack. Special held attack is the same as basic smash attack. So we can ignore it for now. We don't have to do anything with it. Now grab. We should not be able to grab or pick up items while we're stunned. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to add that if statement around everything in this function. And now grab has if can move, character state is not equal to stun, character state is not equal to dead, encompassing everything that grab does. At this point, start blocking. In this case, we make sure that the character state is not equal to dead or respawning. We've been kind of leaving this one out of those above if statements, but it's already in here, so I'm going to leave it. Now I've added character state is not equal to stunned as well. If we're stunned, we don't want to be able to start blocking. Stop blocking is actually okay to leave alone because we specifically check and make sure that we only return to the idle state if we were already in the blocking state. This means if you're stunned, you won't be in the blocking state and thus you won't be able to go to idle. So actually we can leave stop blocking alone. Take damage, handle launch, reset damage counter, debug take damage, lose life, respawn, exit revival platform, break block shield, and tick all can be left alone. With all that done, we can now load the engine, and we don't have to do any blueprint changes today, not even to the keyboard mode or anything like that. That was all set up in the previous block episode. So now we can come into our game, our characters can do their thing, fight each other, and you will see the results that you would expect. One thing I didn't show at the start of the episode that I am going to show now is the number of stun frames. So if we go to our mannequin BP again, and I'm going to type in stun frames, you will see that the number of stun frames for breaking the block shield is 300, and my current number of stun frames is 0. Now, I have one more durability because I've already hit my character twice. I'm going to hit them a third time, which is going to set them into the stunned state. Once they're in here, we can watch the number of stun frames. Notice how it gets set to 300, and then every frame, it is being updated. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this helped you with your game and with upgrading your block. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters once again. Thank you guys for all the love and support and for sticking with me through this fun journey. I really appreciate it. If you had any issues with this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to assist you and get you all sorted so you can continue with the series. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.